Welcome to PowerUp podcast, the podcast that seeks to empower and dismantle, giving us the power and confidence to question, deconstruct, rebuild, and expand in life. I'm your host, AmaRouge, voiceover and multidisciplinary artist, well-being advocate, food and book geek with over 14 years of movement-centered experience.
I am your host, Mesma, artist, choreographer, yogi and coach with a passion for alchemy, creativity, transformation and workplace wellness.
We recognise that we can't dismantle and empower or be empowered without first learning ourselves, diving deeper to unlearn the harmful, restrictive and unprogressive. It's an ongoing practice and journey for us all, which is why we created this podcast.
Our show features guests doing the work to enlighten, deconstruct and power up in their own magical ways.
We're going to be having conversations around the power of healing, transformation, well-being and creativity, and how they feed our personal and collective evolution, how they help us power up. Welcome back to another Power Up podcast episode. And we kicked off season 2 last week with an episode based all around burnout and overwhelm. And we wanted to follow this up with an episode thinking about habits, working to timers, deadlines, how these impact us and what choices we make. And we want to tell you a little bit more about business yoga, which Ella created all around this idea of positive, productive working and bringing well-being into the heart of the workplace. We all know, or I say we all know, but maybe we don't. There's that phrase that goes, be careful of your thoughts because your thoughts become your words. Be careful of your words because your words become your actions. Be careful of your actions because your actions become your habits. And your habits become your values, and your values become the way you live your life. I have no idea where I heard it, and I have no idea who to credit, so if anyone knows, please tell us. But I do think there's a lot of truth in that, which is why we want to look at how we form habits and how we can positively form habits. And so that's what we're going to be doing today. Ella was actually talking with me about the 4 stages of competence in psychology, and we thought it'd be really great to kick this off by diving into that. So Belle, do you want to tell us a little bit about this?
Sure. And I think this is really well demonstrated actually by a quote from Yogi Bhajan, who's the creator. Not always the biggest fan of Yogi Bhajan, but he's the creator of Kundalini. I'm a Kundalini teacher. And he says that doing something every day for 40 days will change a habit. So, for example, you can change an addiction. That doing something for 90 days, you'll confirm that changed habit. And doing something for 120 days, you'll embody that habit. It becomes who you are. And I really think this is such a good way of explaining this principle, because when we're so used to doing something that we don't have to think about how we do it, it is this kind of, it's in our subconscious, it becomes who we are. And actually, I first learned this from Russell Malafont when I was in Russell Malafont Company. He used to talk about that was why we would do so many of the things we did in class, because he really wanted to put it into our subconscious and just make it something that we didn't have to think about. So the 4 stages of conscious competence are, number 1 is unconscious incompetence. So that's where, and I think it's really well, like if you dance, many of our listeners are dancers. I think it's a great example of dance training. Maybe it's when you first come to dance training and you don't understand, you don't know how to do something, and you don't necessarily know how bad you are even. And obviously I'm also a big believer everyone can dance, and this whole technique, as you will hear in our wonderful episode with Emma Houston, sometimes I think actually by learning something, we step out of our genius with that thing. We to do the training, and this is perfectly demonstrated in this model. to do the training, it's like you kind of forget what you know before you then put it into your subconscious, and you can kind of assimilate all the different techniques that you have and make sense of them in your own body. But so unconscious incompetence is when you might not know what you don't know, and you might even kind of deny the usefulness of that skill. So you might not realize that you need that thing, and you might not recognize that you're not competent in it. And the idea in this stage is that you need to recognize your incompetence and the value of the new skill before you can move on to the next stage, and that would really depend from individual to individual to discuss.
So when you say that would depend from individual to individual, do you mean in terms of how long it takes an individual to recognize their own competence and the value of the skill that they need to acquire?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And I think if we link that into habits, it's an interesting, like in terms of the things that we were talking about last week, in terms of perhaps not taking enough time for ourselves, or stress in the workplace. I think it's quite interesting because often we don't realize we're stressed actually until you look back on something and you reflect on it.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think, well, not with regard to stress, but maybe with regard to learning a new skill. There's definitely like a blissful ignorance that can come from not realizing, um, how kind of poor you are at that skill at that point, because there's kind of, I think, a sense of freedom that comes with that, and because you put less pressure on yourself. So it's funny. I think on that side it can be quite enjoyable, but then when you start to learn a skill, then of course you're suddenly flooded with this awareness of how much there is to learn,
Yeah.
and how much there is to acquire. And then I think in response to that, you can go through kind of different responses where sometimes it feels really exciting and you're really up for the challenge. And then sometimes you just feel really overwhelmed and like, oh, I'm not going to get better at this. And I think it's similar to habits, and forming habits. At the very beginning, you might have a response where you feel like, oh God, this is just so difficult to stick to. It's really difficult to be disciplined enough to do this every day or every 3 days or whatever. And then you have some moments where you actually relish the challenge and you welcome it and you feel, really equipped and motivated to do it. And it's about getting past that kind of first stage, isn't it, of recognizing and kind of honestly going, okay, this is where I'm not so great at instilling this habit, and actually this is why I need to do it. And then just pushing forward into the next stage of the process.
Absolutely. And that kind of perfectly leads on to the next stage, which is that conscious incompetence, where you don't understand or know how to do something, but you realize that you don't know. You recognize, suddenly you're aware, I don't know what I don't know. And you kind of, I think it can be quite a hard moment of like, because there's lots of mistakes that you're making, because suddenly like you might end up questioning your whole self rather than just the skill that you're trying to acquire. And I think, we can probably both relate that back to our dance training, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. But shall we move on to the next stage? Because the next stage is quite nice.
Yay.
Let's celebrate when we become consciously competent. So in terms of, I can definitely remember this in ballet, it's like when you understand how to do something, but doing it, for example, pirouettes, it takes serious levels of concentration. Like maybe the tongue comes out the corner of the mouth because that's how hard you're concentrating.
Or as my ballet teacher used to say to me, I look like I want to kill her. And I was like, it's just me concentrating.
Yes, I love it. Yeah, there's like that real, heavy conscious involvement, like you're doing it, but it's not just something that you can, click your fingers. It's like the frown comes out, the breath work, they're like preparing your mind psychologically and
tensing the jaw, not realizing you're not breathing, going into zombie mode face.
Obviously less now, right? Because we're both informed yogis.
Yeah, less now, definitely.
We've got many unconscious competent skills to bring in. But relating that to work, I think it's and if we think about how we work and productivity, and this idea of taking breaks and honouring ourselves as well as the work that we're doing. But it does, it's like, before you just honour both in equal balance, there's that point where it's like you have to actually, for example, put the timers in place so that these things happen. You have to put the systems in place to make sure, to be accountable, and to really make sure that that newfound skill and that new learning is executed.
Yeah, definitely. And I was going to say, I think I'm definitely still at conscious competence when it comes to taking breaks. Um, it's something that I've always been really aware of. And obviously, in a lot of the work we both do, and a lot of the knowledge that we acquire and the things that we're interested in, we have an awareness of this. It's not something completely new to us, but obviously having an awareness of something and it becoming an unconscious competence, and before that, a conscious competence, which is what we're talking about now, obviously completely different things.
Yeah.
And I think I've built up the habit in my life in general of working through breaks or shortening my breaks or squeezing my wee in to just finish that one more thing, which, may take 10 minutes, you think in your head, but then may actually take half an hour in reality. And so I'm definitely now in a place of conscious competence with instilling breaks into my working day and building that habit. And I actually use the 23andMe business yoga timer for that, which I love because it works with that technique of 25 minutes of working, focused working, and then it will go off, which tells me that it's time to have a 5-minute break. And then I'll have a 5-minute break, which actually you think 5 minutes is kind of, it's short, but you think it's still a good quantity of time. When that timer's going down, you're like, oh, 5 minutes actually isn't that much. And it actually forces me to like get up out of my chair and do something else, walk around, dance to a song, make a cup of tea, something, stretch, do some seated yoga. Like seriously, genuinely makes me do something else because I'm suddenly aware that 5 minutes isn't that long and I want to utilize that time away from whatever I've just been doing. So one, I can have a break from it and come back feeling fresher, and two, so my mind can have that break from it as well. And we know that taking breaks makes us more productive and also allows us to enjoy more what we're doing. So yeah, it's a really good way for me of starting to build that habit to a place where eventually, it will become unconscious.
And I'm relating to so much of what you're saying, Emma. On all levels, there's little chuckles of like, yep, to that 5 minutes where it's like, oh my God, it's gone. And learning to grab it and not just go, oh, well, it's only 5 minutes, so I'll just carry on working. You know what I mean? It's so important.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a big, big note, I think, to make, because it's very easy to do that.
Yeah. I wanted to bring it to the final phase, which for sure is such a celebration when you get to that place where it's second nature. So for example, with dancing, when you're just in it and you notice when you watch the video back, for example, that, oh, brilliant, my technique is there and I'm turning out and I'm doing my pirouettes without thinking. And, all of those things have just become that kind of that second nature. That this is that final stage when you've had so much practice of the skill, probably at least 100 times, maybe 1,000 times of doing that thing, that it becomes effortless, that you are in flow, you're in that state of flow. And even that maybe you can do that skill and do another task at the same time. Make pancakes and dance, for example. And
have a conversation whilst dancing.
Have a conversation whilst dancing. Shall we do it right now?
Go.
And as a result, that you can also you may be able to teach it to others. And for me, this is like the genius state. Also, like if you think of, I seem to really be going on about Beethoven and Mozart, but that state where it's not about what you've been taught, it's about taking all the skills and then going back to that stage, when right at the beginning, when you're unconsciously incompetent. But actually, I like when I look back at some of the videos of me dancing from way back then, yes, okay, it was super messy. There was no technique there, but there was genius because there was heart and there was my passion. And it's almost like I feel like when you come to that end stage, you can bring all of that back, but with a kind of like informed, with an intellectual almost kind of backing. But for me, once you get to that stage, it's almost, I think it becomes also a state of unlearning, of letting go of everything that you kind of need to know and everything that you think about, to really step into that kind of meditative state of flow. And for me, this really linked well back to productivity, because when we can set up the structures to work in a state of flow, then we create so much better work, we have much more value, we give so much more value, and we are really able to almost work from heart and work from truth, rather than from that state of stress or fight or flight mode.
So I know, for example, with my personal yoga practice, I have recently, I would say within the past year, recently finally developed a consistent yoga practice. And I've been practicing yoga since 2015. And I was looking back through when I realised, wow, I've been practicing since 2015 and I've only just developed a consistent yoga practice. Wow, that's crazy. And for me, the way that I did it was through this consistent reinforcements, building a habit of practicing every day for 2 months. And even if it was like 5 minutes, I would be like, right, I'm doing it. Even if I was dog tired, I was like, right, I'm doing it, because I was so tired of not having a consistent yoga practice, because it's something that nourishes me so much and reveals so much of me to myself and allows me to grow and develop and also hold space for myself, that I knew I wanted a consistent yoga practice. And actually, the fact that I've been practicing since 2015 but hadn't been able to develop one without consciously creating the habit of practice
Yeah.
in a structured way says it all. It's only now I've done that it's something I can consistently go to without needing to have it scheduled into my week, month, um, in a super consistent way, in terms of timings and it being in my calendar. So there's a huge amount, I think, to be said for arriving at that place of unconscious competence, and it's worth it. I think it's worth moving through all the stages. Because then you get to a point where, like you said, it's almost like all the rules, you understand them all, and then you can choose to throw them out when you want. You can choose which things you want to keep in and take out, and you're able to play around with it in a way where you can be in your genius.
I'm also really grateful to like dance school for enforcing habits, and
Yes.
like even the yoga. So like I would probably not have become a yoga teacher had my yoga teacher at dance school not offered me a scholarship to become one in 2009.
Amazing.
And I think, yeah, I'm just super grateful because that did it. That was like, that embedded it for me. That experience of doing it on the weekends all day for 2 days, I couldn't not become, a huge part of my life. I also wanted to offer, because I think this feels connected to my learning recently around the idea of eat the frog, and how that's really helped me in terms of my to-do list and that kind of overcoming the sense of overwhelm. And I would love to offer to the listener a few questions that just really helped me in terms of this, putting habits in place in terms of productivity and work, the workplace. But I think Eat the Frog helps me, or has helped me for sure, in terms of when I experience resistance to doing what I know is good for me, which I'm sure many people relate to, those mornings when you wake up and you're like, I don't want to do yoga. So Eat the Frog is a book. And the concept is that often we don't face what we need to do most. We leave that thing, so it's just ribbiting in our ear all day. and we're like, oh, I don't like it, and we push it away and we push it away. So the concept of eat the frog is basically to eat the frog, to face the thing that's there snapping away at you, going, I need this, I need this, I need this, and do it first and get it out of the way.
I love that concept.
And honestly, it's such a simple concept. It's changed my life. It's so helpful, because what I realized was I had a really epic inbox story, which was there was always hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, Amma knows this, sometimes thousands of emails in my inbox. And what I've realized was it's because there were so many frogs in there, which were things I didn't want to be adult about and face. So I just left them. Do that one day, do that one day, or not today, I'll do that tomorrow. And it just would go on and on and on. And so that concept for me, it just changed everything. And I think that can really help in terms of when we wake up, having our morning practice, tuning in to what we need for that day, doing our choices, for example, and then just facing and going for the things that you need to do and getting them done, so that you can then really be in the states that you mentioned of, like, when we're just working in flow and we're taking the breaks without even, it's just a part of our way of being in a habit.
Yeah, I love that. Never heard that before, and I really, really love it. Something that I'm definitely going to carry with me.
Give it a go. Let me know how you go. Yeah.
I will. I'm going to tie it to my takeaway from Sabotage, which is a book by Emma Gannon, and she says, if it's going to take 5 minutes or less, do it now.
There it is. She's eating a lot of frogs, isn't she?
Yeah, but it's slightly different, and I kind of like the two, because eating the frog, the thing might take you longer than 5 minutes, but it
That's
might
true.
be the most pressing thing, like you're saying, that's there, and you're like, actually, do you know what? I just need to do that first. Just do it.
Yeah.
Just eat the frog.
And it's really interesting. Like I've really noticed those things would give me anxiety. And essentially what it was I was choosing not to fully stand in my power and take responsibility for myself. And so by doing those things in the morning of like, okay, what's the thing I need to do today? For example, today it's to book those PCR tests. So get it done. It's done. Great. Then I can just enjoy my day and not go, oh, that little niggle that's, you feel it in your stomach or you feel it in
Yes.
your womb space. And it's like, ugh, got to do that thing. Or your heart contracts.
Shoulders. You're like, ugh, don't want to. Not wanting to do it is not going to get it done. It's not going to make it go away, is it? But eating the frog is. I love that.
So I did have some little questions that I thought might be quite interesting to offer. This comes from a much longer kind of piece of work, but I'm just gonna offer a few that really feel that they connect into that making good habits. Which is, what do you spend time on that is a distraction? And then figuring out like what percentage of your day is that taking up? What do you spend time on that is urgent and important? And again, what percentage of the day is that taking up? And then what percentage of time are you spending on things that are really important to you and in that state of flow, in that beautiful state of genius? And again, what percentages, looking at the percentages. And I think when I did that work, when I looked at those things, it really helped me. And then, for example, where are you putting your focus that really isn't serving you? What are the things that you're doing that you don't want to spend time on? And again, knowing those percentages, because when I did that work, I realized there were actually things that I could outsource and ask for help with that maybe aren't in my skill set, and that's okay. And then it meant that I could actually spend more time being in my genius zone and really doing the stuff that I'm great at and I love doing. And I found that as I've done that, I've kind of really stepped into that understanding that we don't have to have this relationship with time where we're always running away from it. We can really step into, having an abundance of time and being abundant with our time and choosing to do things that make us joyful so that we get into that state, that state when it's like time goes, but you have no idea, no concept of time because you're so in flow.
It's the best.
I think this really links back into creating good habits, help us to really live the life that we would love. And
also helps us to avoid burnout.
Yeah, they help us to avoid burnout. And I think I used to kind of have this idea that, you know, people who were organized were this way, and like I didn't need to be because I was creative, you know, had this kind of resistance to structure. But what I've realized is actually the structures allow me to be more creative and allow me to have more time with my loved ones and allow me to have more time with myself. And so I really think structures are actually incredibly creative and allow us to really be our best selves and to really be moving from that place of full up, so that we, like you said, so we don't fall into burnout and so we don't fall into overwhelm. And the other thing that I've really found is sometimes a to-do list, I find it so overwhelming because it's never going to get all done, that instead of having a to-do list, creating those structures so you have the space to do things, you have the space to eat the frogs, but that it's less looking at that to-do list constantly, which often for me was connected into my feeling of overwhelm. And, you know, I mentioned that kind of lying in bed, thinking about what you should do but aren't doing.
Yeah.
Whereas if I have my focus work time or I have my creative work time kind of set out, or my email time, then I can get the things done and eat the frogs in those set bits of time, and then be in nature and be with beautiful humans and, you know, enjoy all the magic of life.
Yes to that.
Thank you for listening. You can connect to us and our guests via the links in each episode's show notes. Before you go, we invite you to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on any of the goodness to come. And if you enjoyed today, perhaps tell a friend to tell a friend. We are always grateful for you, our listeners, for our fabulous guests, and to everyone who has contributed to and been a part of our journey here.
Our music is by Tomo Carter. Everything else is brought to you by us, the PowerUp Power Team.
I'm Mesma.
I am AmaRouge. And we are PowerUp Podcast.